Welcome back to the Nebraska Shoot Around podcast. It's been a couple weeks since we've talked to you, but a lot has happened since then. So here I am, Jacob Bigelow, your host, back once again with my co-host, Jacob Bigelow. Biggs, how you doing?
Doing all right, man. I mean, we promised the people that they'd hear from us if there was news to discuss, and today that is the case.
Yeah.
So here we are.
Yeah. We're recording this on Wednesday night and day after the introductory press conference for Fred Hoiberg's new assistant, Adam Howard. And so that's obviously going to be a bulk of what we talked about today. But just kind of going back, the last time we talked at you was March 24th, and Sam Griesel had announced his transfer. But beyond that, there was still a lot hanging out there. So since we last recorded, both Blaise Keita and Ramel Lloyd Jr. affirmed their commitments to Nebraska. So they, along with Jamarcus Lawrence, will be coming to Lincoln as the 2022 recruiting class. As we said previously, Denham Dawson was already on campus, so I think he felt pretty good about being able to keep him. So that was a big first development for Fred Hoiberg. And he talked about that a little bit at his press conference about how he made sure to go out and visit both Blaise and Ramel in particular. Jamarcus he had just seen late in the season while watching one of his games during an East Coast trip. So he didn't fly out to see Jamarcus after the season, but the other guys he did to kind of touch base with them, kind of let them know what the plan is and see how they were feeling. And so both those guys are still in the fold here moving forward, as is Armond Gates, who appears to be sticking around for another season. We weren't quite sure what happened there with his brother Dennis Gates getting the Missouri job, and obviously there's a lot of position openings with the typical coaching carousel that we see every year. You never quite know what opportunities may come around, but it looks like the plan is to bring Armond back, and we'll touch on this later. But I think part of that was Fred agreeing to kind of empower him once again and kind of keep him more involved and give him a little bit more responsibility than he had under the previous staff configuration, I would imagine. And then since then, Derek Walker also announced that he's coming back for another year. I think we had kind of settled on that being likely the last time we had talked, but it is now official. He put out the video and everything. So that's a big win for Hoiberg, having his most consistent performer coming back from last season and one of his best players overall and one of his best leaders. We're still waiting on Trey McGowan's and Latman. So we'll see what happens there. And then finally, Hoiberg hired Adam Howard. So all that has happened in the 2 weeks since we last recorded. So I guess let's see, where do you want to kind of jump off here from all that?
Kind of start. Let's work to present day. Yeah. I think we kind of alluded 2 weeks ago to maybe Fred is trying to save the recruiting class himself. Yeah. That's exactly what he was doing. Yeah. And he alluded to it in his press conference that he made it a point to fly out west and fly to middle of nowhere, Kansas, to go see Ramel and Blaise. And obviously they both had their own connections to Matt Abdelmassi. So naturally you needed to go at least get a temperature check, get a feel for what was going on. And thankfully, there wasn't, there was a little bit of uneasiness, some things getting deleted from social media bios, that sort of thing, a little bit of, what's going on here. But in the end, it ended up not meaning much. And they're both going to, be Huskers in early June, I would assume. With Lloyd, that's a very long backcourt now.
Yeah.
It already was with the Sam Griesel transfer, and Ramel is 6'6", right? 6. Yeah. They have him listed at 6'6".
That's what he's listed
and yeah, that's what he was listed at. And prior to the addition of Griesel, there had been a lot of talk around Ramel Lloyd being the point guard next year. and that being what he was sold on coming to Nebraska to do. So now, I mean, and this all it all ties together at the end with Howard and his defensive ideology, but we'll get there. That's a very long backcourt, and honestly, it's a very long team because with Cato reaffirming his commitment, you kind of now have a log jam inside, even with the departure of Eduardo Andre, and we're assuming probable departure of Latman. There's still some pretty big bodies in that program, and it'll be interesting to see what they do. And how they construct lineups and rotations with what they have now. They did lock in an official visit from their top transfer portal target and arguably a lot of schools' top transfer portal target in Illinois State transfer Antonio Reeves. Supposedly
I think we can. I think we can touch a little bit more on that once we get to the questions section. I believe we did get a question kind of target, like what are they going to look at moving forward? And obviously he is part of that answer.
Yes, he might be the only answer, but we can cross that bridge when we get to it. Definitely good to see Lloyd and Cada, reaffirm at the end of the day. This was a very, I feel like the recruiting class was one of the selling points that Fred probably sold to Trev as part of the quote unquote plan. So it's, I'm just interested to see, obviously where the roster goes from here. We're awaiting 2 more decisions and Derek Walker gets to be one of the few, if possibly the only guy in college basketball to have 3 senior nights coming back. So good for him.
It's a good point, and I wonder how many other schools were kind of in a similar situation over the past few years that they've kind of tried to figure out, navigate through this time. Derek, obviously, unique situation where he was graduating as a junior with eligibility during his junior eligible season, and obviously becoming the first from his family to graduate. That was an important deal to him, just having that moment. But I'm sure there are all kinds of firsts around the country in terms of what the extra year has done for just record books. And obviously we saw Jordan Bohannon break the Big Ten record for threes, and we see guys setting program record for games played all over the place. And just it's going to be a very bizarre time to look back on once we get 10 years down the road. And like, man, what happened in the mid 2010s? There was some weird stuff going on.
Absolutely. No, that's for sure. Gonna be a lot of long tenured faces finally not returning in the Big Ten, but Nebraska will have one of the longest tenured players next year in Walker.
25 next year, I believe. As season opens, something like that. But hey, he's got that ability, and he's going to help Nebraska. We'll talk about a little bit what that picture looks like down the line, but you'd rather have him than not, both on the court and in the locker room. So that's all in all, things have gone pretty well for Fred Hoiberg so far this offseason, at least as well as you could have hoped. I think they landed their like one of their biggest transfer targets already in Greasel. He was right at the top of their list, I believe. So we've seen Nebraska's name kind of tossed around with a lot of guys in the portal, which is pretty standard. A lot of schools do just kind of reach out anytime a kid they're even remotely interested in, just to make sure kind of that they've got their foot in the door if they decide they want to go forward with that. So we've seen a little bit of that, but I don't know that. I think Fred mentioned that he had gone out. They'd gone out to visit somebody last week, I believe. So they're starting to kind of move forward a little bit more with the portal. And right now, pending any returns, I believe they're sitting at 11 scholarships committed. So Trey McGowan's coming back would be 12, which would leave one spot open for a transfer like Reeves. If Latman does indeed decide to move on, which I think we both believe will be the case. So that's kind of where Nebraska is right now. that trade decision will, I think, kind of shift how things will go moving forward. But we're not to that point yet. We'll see kind of where they get. I think a lot of that will come down to whatever opportunities that Trey can find for himself. I don't think anybody here is expecting there to be real NBA opportunities there, even though that's kind of always the dream for basically everybody that plays college ball. But I mean, sure, there will be professional opportunities out there in various leagues, and it'll come down to whether kind of what Trey wants and what his goals are, and kind of the feedback he gets as he goes through this process. So we will kind of evaluate what happens there once that decision is made. In the meantime, like we mentioned, Armond Gates, we do know as of now, is going to be part of this picture moving forward. And with the addition of Howard, I think I wrote about this in my Wednesday column, padding the stats on hailvarsity.com. You can kind of read my expanded thoughts there, but this really does. And Gates saying, and kind of the message that Fred gave during the press conference, and we can get into the kind of Adam Howard part of this now. He multiple times made sure to kind of steer back the conversation or mention to how well-rounded Howard is as a coach, and how he was looking for somebody that could come in and do everything. And we talked at the kind of what he's known for is the defensive side of things, and that's kind of what is kind of attached to his coaching career to this point. But he made sure to point out, not just this isn't a case where he's a defensive coordinator coming in and that's what he's here to do. He's here to recruit. He's here to help develop on the court, and he's here to implement the defensive strategy that he's developed. So, and I think that signifies more of a traditional all hands on deck approach with the coaching staff, where you will see Lenzer and Gates and Howard all out on the recruiting trail. You will see more guys involved in getting eyes on players and determining, all right, is he a fit for what we want to do? All those types of things. So what was your kind of takeaway just in terms of what this staff looks like right now?
I mean, I agree completely. It's definitely a a way to say without saying, like, we tried to do this one way, we're going to do it how 99% of other college programs do it. I mean, Adam Howard, he mentioned multiple times the value of relationships, but in his coaching career, and I mean how even just one probably chance encounter with Fred Hoiberg, at a Sun Belt game this year, at a South Alabama Texas Arlington game this year, helped them kind of reconnect, and and now here we are months later and he's on staff. It's definitely all hand. The thing that pops into my head more than anything is now I want to see them practice. They don't even have their complete team together yet, but knowing how college practices are ran, how they go, and we've never gotten to watch this team, this regime run a practice, but I'm interested to see how it looks now with a bunch of with three assistants who have their own unique set of skills, really, and they're not all just off the court, and they're all you mentioned it before we started recording. We were kind of looking the wrong way when we thought that this hire was going to be someone with a connection to Fred, when it appears that the Howard connection is to Nate Lenzer and Armond Gates. And chemistry on staff chemistry that's huge. Like that's big. I mean, I saw it, I had a front row seat to it, with that last year under Coach Miles, with Michael Lewis and Armand and Jim Molinari, and they the staff chemistry, staff camaraderie, I mean, it goes a long way. And if they have the same mission, obviously, and for lack of a better word, I rambled on enough. It's very, very, very promising to see them go this way with staff construction.
Yeah. And Cliff Notes, Fred mentioned that he brought Howard up a few years ago. He didn't specify when exactly, but a couple years ago in the preseason, he brought him up to demonstrate his matchup zone and kind of some of his defensive principles to Fred's staff and the other guys, because they wanted to implement some of that type of stuff into what they were doing. And we did see kind of this year, especially towards the tail end of the year, Nebraska did start switching defenses more. They tried some different things with pressure and zones and all that type of stuff. And he mentioned that's kind of when this whole thing got started. He brought him up for that demonstration and was really impressed with what he heard and the way he answered questions and it's kind of the acumen that he displayed during that presentation. And then they kind of stayed in touch a little bit. And then you mentioned he went down to watch his son Jack at UT Arlington, and they happened to be playing South Alabama. And Fred and Adam cross paths and kind of reconnected. And Fred said, like, from that, he kind of kept him in the back of his mind if he were to ever have a staff opening. And sure enough, when kind of the whole deal went down and Abdelmassi departed and suddenly you do have a hole on the staff, Hoiberg said Adam was kind of like one of the first guys that he's like, all right, let's go see what Adam Howard's doing and whether he might be interested. So that's kind of how things played out. And Tuesday, you had heard what last week, I think was the first time you heard the name.
I think Monday of last week going into the Final Four was the first. I mean, we had talked 2 weeks ago about it being quiet, and I had heard, Adam Howard on that Monday last week. That was the only name we heard, and it ended up being the guy. And Fred said it was the first name that came to his mind and the first call he made. So unlike a lot of different searches that we've gone through in this state, this one, the pool wasn't very large. It was one name and one guy, and he wound up being the guy. So
yeah, and like you said, we had a tough time trying to find someone with Hoiberg ties, and those ties did exist to this staff, but not to Hoiberg outside of those previous meetings. It was he had been friends with Nate Lenzer for a while, and he was actually playing at Western Kentucky while Armond Gates was a GA there. So he goes way back with both of Fred's other assistants. So you've already kind of got that chemistry started there with that staff coming in here. And Fred's obviously been impressed by Adam and what he's shown him over the last few years. So I think they're probably in a good spot here. We'll see. Now, I like how it looks. Again, we like the direction, we like some of the ideas. Now, can they execute it well enough to make the progress that they need to in a big year for Fred Hoiberg and his tenure at Nebraska? Obviously, another 7 to 10 win season probably isn't going to result in them getting to run this thing back. So now the question begins, how successful will these moves that he's made? They look good on paper. Can they implement them and execute well enough to win games in the Big Ten? And more specifically on Howard and kind of his background, we started at Morehead State as a GA, and then for a year, and then got moved up to the staff the year after that, and that was the year that they had Kenneth Faried and knocked off Louisville in the NCAA tournament. That was his first year as a full-time assistant coach, and so he was there 2 years after that. Then went with Donnie Tyndall, the head coach there, followed him to Troy, or Southern Miss rather. Troy was later, but followed him to Southern Miss, and then from Southern Miss, Tyndall went to Tennessee and brought Howard with him. And then 3 weeks into the season, or somewhere about that point, Howard resigned at Tennessee as the NCAA launched an investigation into Southern Miss. And by the end of that whole deal, the kind of situation played out where Tyndall got a 10-year show cause penalty, which is, if you paid attention to NCAA penalties, that is a lot. A 10-year show cause. I think it was probably the most extensive penalty that the NCAA has kind of laid down of that kind. So Howard didn't really talk much about that. He just kind of, like, in terms of what he learned from that, he said the kind of the stories out there, you can look it up. A lot has been written about it, but terms of his takeaway, it was just he just talked about the relationships with people on campus, and that was basically what his whole answer was around, like just really getting to know the people there and building those relationships. And mentioned how he's gotten hired 3 times since then, which were Troy and South Alabama and now Nebraska. So that's kind of his coaching background. Hoiberg said he went through a background check, and the administration, the compliance office, neither of them raised any red flags or anything. And the associate AD, I believe, at Southern Miss at that time, ended up hiring him at a following stop.
At Troy.
Fred mentioned that. So it's like, well, if he was there and knew what was going on there and still felt comfortable hiring him, I feel good there. So that's kind of that deal of it. That's his background. He's from Kentucky, grew up there. He's basically coached in the South his entire career. So this will be a little bit of change for him. His wife is from Louisiana. Their whole family's down there. So it's going to be completely new for Howard, but he said he's kind of looking forward to the opportunity to coach in the Big Ten, to be around a coach like Hoiberg, and to experience something new.
Absolutely. And, it's the coaching profession, it's a long journey. It can take you on to many places, and some of the stuff you see and deal with, you really can't make up. And at the end of the day, hard work pays off, and the goal is to, keep ascending. And he's definitely had a journey, but it's there. I felt happy for the guy. Didn't even know him, and I felt happy for him just listening to him talk about the opportunity and everything. Like this is the big time for him, and you can tell what part of the country he's from listening to him talk.
Yes.
But I wasn't at the press conference, but I'm interested to hear more from him, going forward for sure.
Yep. So more on Howard and his coaching style, and we talk about what he's known for with the defense, and started coming up under Donnie Tyndall, and kind of learning the matchup zone and pressure and that type of stuff. You kind of look at South Alabama last year, and their defense, their adjusted defensive efficiency was only 149th. What they did well was block shots. They were 18th in the country in block percentage. And they were pretty good at forcing turnovers. And team shot, they weren't elite defensively, but team shot 71st in effective field goal percentage against, 42nd in turnover percentage against. So they did some things well defensively, even though overall it wasn't like they were elite defensively according to KenPom, but which kind of again, it's adjusted and they kind of factor different things in. But where you go, if you go to Synergy and kind of look at that, and at South Alabama's defense last year, kind of breaks it down a little bit more. And overall, they were in the 96th percentile in points per possession allowed at 0.807, and team shot 40% against them. And we talk about he likes the zone defense, but also he learned kind of some new man concepts and way to teach it from Rodney Crawford, who is an assistant at South Alabama. And you look at kind of their breakdown last year. South Alabama played man-to-man roughly 71% of the time, and they were in the 90th percentile, giving up 0.801 points per possession and 46.5 adjusted field goal percentage, which is just effective field goal percentage. And then zone defense was the other roughly 29%, and they were in the 85th percentile in that, and 0.782 points per possession and 43 adjusted field goal percent. So they were effective man zone 70-30 split. It's still a lot of zone compared to a lot of schools, but it wasn't like they're Syracuse either. It's more of a strategic thing where they do it a lot on baseline plays. They'll do it sometimes out of just kind of live play or whatever. They'll fall back into it, but they'll also play a lot of man. And they also pressed, according to Synergy, 7% of their possessions. And they were 87th percentile there, giving up 0.727 there. And I did watch some of the clips for their zone. I watched some of the clips for their press just here on Synergy. And what stood out to me with their zone is it truly is a matchup zone. And sometimes it looks like it kind of starts in a 2-3 type of look. Sometimes they kind of have guys more extended and kind of floating around. But in general, basically they plant one guy in the lane and then have the other 4 kind of play around them and match up and fly around and try to create havoc. And it really does require guys to be on the same page. It requires you to be able to read both offensive, what they're trying to do, and then defensively what your teammates are doing, because guys will be jumping at the ball. They'll be switching. They'll hand guys off within the matchup zone that guys have to kind of get over and cover. So it is just kind of is somewhat chaotic in the clips that I was watching, but kind of interesting. We'll see how that translates to the Big Ten level, where you've got players that are obviously more physically gifted. You've got guys that can shoot the ball a little bit better than you might find at the lower level. Just kind of the overall talent level is there. The coaching level is pretty high in the Big Ten. So we'll see how much of that translates, but there is some man in there as well.
Yeah. One thing that popped into my head about the Big Ten thing was, if you want to ask a Big Ten team about a matchup zone, just ask Purdue. Just ask Purdue about how their season ended in the NCAA tournament. That you can, if you want to get Matt Painter on the phone, ask him about a matchup zone when you're a top 5 offensive efficiency team in KenPom, and you've never seen something like that all year. You end up losing to St. Peter's. That's what happens. Leave it to North Carolina, a team that plays in the same league as Syracuse and sees that zone twice a year, to be the team that thoroughly dismantled St. Peter's and ended their season. But if you just go, I'm not saying Nebraska is going to be a giant killer, but if you want to see what a matchup zone looks like against a Big Ten team, I will refer you to St. Peter's Purdue.
Yeah. It's a good point. And Howard talked about how, like, basically what he's going to run depends on what everybody's comfortable with, what the personnel is, what Hoiberg wants to do, and he'll adjust to kind of what they have and what works. They press, I mentioned press 7% of the time. Some of that was just kind of like token pick up full court man, where your guards just kind of harass them in the backcourt and just give them something to think about. And then some of it was where they fall back into man in the half court. And then some of it was more in the zone, where they extend the guys up top out 3-quarter type looks and really pressure the ball and trap if he comes close enough. But most of the time, just kind of give him something to think about and try to set up falling back into that zone and just really keeping teams off balance. So it's not like they're running full court and trapping in the back court and running all this type of stuff. It's more token pressure. But I mean, that exists for a reason. That can be effective, and it does give teams more to think about, more to worry about. It makes them work harder throughout the course of a game. If you're a team with a little less depth and you're playing your guards long minutes, that could make things more difficult on you later in the game if you have to deal with that. So those are just some of the things in watching and kind of looking into the numbers for South Alabama defensively. Obviously, they weren't playing the stiffest of competition. They were down in the Sun Belt, like you said. We did hear about one unfortunate incident against South Alabama's defense this past year, where a certain player
that was 2 years ago, where a friend of mine in the coaching profession, he will go nameless, but a friend of mine in the coaching profession was on a Sunbelt staff, and they were underdogs to South Alabama, and South Alabama came into their arena, and this school's best player made 11 three-pointers and finished the game with 44 points. Did South Alabama switch out of that zone? No, they did not. So you can't be doing that in the Big Ten. That was just one example. But that was something that was quickly brought up to the two of us.
Because this certain person also reached out to me and asked me to ask the question, but I did not get the DM submission until after the press conference was over. So But yeah, and so I mentioned the 70-30 split this past season for South Alabama. 2 years ago, it was inverted. It was 70% zone and 30% man. So that and they were below average in man defense, and they were good. They were 29th percentile in man and 63rd percentile in zone, which probably explains why they stayed in the zone so much, because they couldn't guard man to man. But this past year, they were better, much better in both areas, and talked about the number of transfers they had and for some higher levels in their program last year. So it does kind of paint the picture of a coach that can adjust to his personnel and to the coaches on staff with him. He mentioned kind of the impact that, or the influence that Rodney Crawford had in their defense and his man-to-man concept. So we'll see kind of how that kind of the mind meld happens there with Howard coming up here and joining a Nebraska team. Obviously, we know Fred is much more interested in the offensive side of the ball. That's kind of where his expertise lies. He mentioned he likes some of the stuff they did run defensively to kind of keep teams off balance down the stretch, and wants to continue some of that under Howard's guidance. So we'll see kind of where they settle in next year in terms of man versus zone and how much of each. But yeah, that's kind of what the picture looks like, and what Howard has done most recently with South Alabama.
Yeah, I mean, when we saw, I saw firsthand what having a defensive-minded assistant coach looks like when I was around Jim Molinari for 3 years. Yeah. Mo was very, he was known for wanting to play pack line. I think there was no bigger fan of Virginia basketball than Jim Molinari. He loved watching the Tony Bennett pack line stuff. But then again, especially, in that 17-18 team where Miles would throw in the 1-3-1, he'd throw in the different zone schemes. And it was, just because a coach may be known for something doesn't mean that that's going to be all you see, is what I'm trying to get at. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of different options and probably a kitchen sink approach to defense, but it helps to have someone with the defensive mindset in your program.
Yeah. Well, look no further than Nebraska the last couple of years. In year one was pretty bad for Hoiberg bringing in. They were, according to KenPom, they're 152nd in adjusted defensive efficiency. So not horrible, just kind of right smack dab towards the middle of the country. In year two, with Doc Sadler still on staff, that improved to 40th. And they improved their efficiency by by just over 7 points per 100 possessions. And this past season, with Sadler taking a step back into the special assistant to the head coach role, which Hoiberg confirmed will not exist moving forward. He's not planning to hire anybody else for that spot. It will just be the three full-time assistants plus Hoiberg and his support staff. But with kind of Sadler not as an active coach, and kind of Nate Lenzer is more of a development offensive-minded guy that he brought in to replace Sadler, they spiraled down to 178th in adjusted defensive efficiency this year, and gave up all that ground that they had made up. So that just kind of points to the importance of having somebody that emphasizes it, that knows what he's doing. And Hoiberg is hoping that Adam Howard can be that guy for Nebraska in 2022-23. Is there anything else from the press conference or anything that kind of stood out to you that we haven't hit on yet?
No, not really. I think we've kind of covered all the bases, if I say.
I did put out the call for a couple for some questions, and we did get a couple responses. So we might have hit on some of this stuff at least a little bit, but let's kind of turn over to those here before we wrap up here. And so Aaron asks, in a matchup zone like Howard runs, assuming he does, what player do you think will elevate? Howard referenced that they will go with whatever is comfortable with the team to run defensively based on personnel. Need to fill 1 to 2 pieces still. What style of defense works best? And that is a difficult question to answer. I mentioned how last year's South Alabama team they had some good rim protection. They were pretty good defensively in terms of blocking shots, and Nebraska does not really have a shot blocker on the roster. So that's one thing that they're going to have to adjust to. You can't really play the Creighton style where you funnel everything to your elite shot blocker because they don't have one. That's not really Blaise Keita's strength. He's more of an offensive rebounding type of center, offensive and rebounding type of center rather. And Derek Walker is pretty similar, where he's a good positional defender, but he's not a guy that's going to go out and block 2 shots a game. And he is a little bit undersized as the back line there. So I don't know quite how that fits, but in terms of overall on the roster, like you mentioned, you look at the length, you could throw out a lineup where Griso at 6'6", Lloyd at 6'6", CJ Wilcher at 6'5", or Denim Dawson at 6'6", Wilhelm Breidenbach at 10 is he now? Derek Walker at 6'9", or Blaise Keita at 6'10". Like you can throw up lineups like that where you're basically 6'4" or 6'5", 6'6", and above. And this doesn't even factor in potential Trey McGowan's return, who's obviously your best defender. So I think that's what they like, is the length and the potential for that length to be disruptive in the half court. So I think they're definitely going to experiment with that matchup zone. And that's part of why Hoiberg hired Howard. I don't know, again, the degree to which he'll play one versus the other. I think we will see both, and just kind of they'll have to adjust based on what they're doing well. Just kind of looking at this roster here. What do you think? How do you think they kind of fit in with what Howard has done previously?
I think I kind of alluded to it, that length in any zone can be a problem. And then if you have a guy to clog the middle, depending on the matchup, that can be really, really dangerous. But then, it just depends on, it's going to be, everything in basketball defensively, very matchup dependent, very, who are you? They're not going to run the same defense against Maine or Omaha that they're going to run against, a team like Purdue or a team like Illinois. It's going to be matchup dependent. It's in right now, with the way that this roster could, who knows if they add, say they add, and this is another question we got about, who are they targeting? Say they add an Antonio Reeves. Say that, that makes things, that is just even more length and athleticism. I'm interested, based on personnel. I don't really know. I really don't. I think I'll just default to the answer of, tell me who they're playing, and then I'll tell you.
I am kind of probably defensively the guy I'm most interested in seeing is Denim Dawson, just based on what I was told about him, what I've heard about him as a player, and how he kind of fits into that 3-and-D defensive athlete mold that Nebraska hasn't really had many of since Hoiberg's been in Lincoln. He's a guy that is an above the rim type of athlete that can move his feet and supposedly step out and knock down shots, and he can cut to the rim. And so if you got a 6'6" athlete on the wing, that's something they haven't had in terms of a guy that can slide his feet and stay in front of people outside of Trey McGowan's. And we talked about early in the season just how startling the difference was with Trey out there as a guy who could do that compared to everybody else that they had been rolling out there. So if you get a guy out on the wing like a Denim Dawson, and if you do get a Trey McGowan's coming back like that, imagine those guys kind of trapping and flying around and playing within that matchup zone. That could be really interesting. And then he also gives you the ability to better defend man-to-man and to match up with athletic wings, which is an area that they really struggled with last year. So if we're talking about defense, Denim, especially having this kind of second half of the season to be on campus and go through strength and conditioning and to adjust to college life already, he's already got a leg up on everybody else that's coming into the program. Like as these freshmen, these guys have never played or never experienced life at the D1 level. So Denim is the guy that I'm kind of most intrigued by in terms of how they're going to fit. I think Sam Griso, Ramel Lloyd will, I don't still kind of waiting to see on Lloyd in terms of lateral quickness and defensively what he brings to the table. We'll see kind of Sam as well, how he fits into that. I think you do have 6'6" guards in that zone that could be really disruptive. All they got to do is get their hands up and be in the right spots and can make life difficult. So I think those guys, you could play those guys together and within that zone, and maybe you don't have to worry about, all right, who can match up one-on-one with this lightning quick little 6-foot point guard or whatever. You can focus more on defending those guys as a team and not having to worry about having a great matchup for that. So that's another kind of aspect of it that I kind of think about how it might fit into the defense. So hopefully that kind of answers Aaron's questions a little bit there. Second question asker was Derek, and we'll start with the first question. He had two. You already alluded to the second, but first, how do you guys see the Cato Walker lineups Hoiberg mentioned working out? And that he did mention, he was asked about kind of what that picture looks like with the two of them, and he mentioned like you can run actions with to keep these guys to kind of figure out ways to be effective. And he talked about how they were undersized last year and struggled at times against bigger, more athletic front lines, where heck, half the season they were playing CJ Wilcher as a power forward at 6'5". And so I'm still kind of struggling to kind of see how that does work together. But at the same time, if these guys if Blaise Cato lives up to the height, you're going to have to at least try it, because capping either Derek or Blaise, who might be two of your 5 or 6 best players, 20 minutes a game just isn't going to work. And again, sorry for mentioning Creighton here, but that's kind of what Greg McDermott and Creighton ran into this year with Ryan Hawkins and Arthur Kaluma being two of their 5 best players. They both probably are best fits at the power forward spot, but with a center like Ryan Kalkbrenner, kind of man in the 5 spot, to get those guys out there, you had to play one of those guys out on the wing. So you had guys playing slightly out of position, but you were willing to do it and kind of work through the growing pains so that you could get your best players on the court and get the most out of them. So we could kind of run into that here with Nebraska, where, yeah, it's probably not ideal with the way that Fred typically wants to play, but maybe there is a way to construct your lineups in such a way that you can be successful with both those guys out there on the court. Neither one of them is a threat really to shoot the ball at all. I think Blaise took a couple of mid-range jumpers, but we know that's not really part of Derek's game, and neither of them extend out to the 3-point line. But we have seen Derek working out of the high post, whether he's handling the ball with some dribble handoffs or some of the high-low actions. So I could easily see a little high-low action there where you get the ball to Derek in the high post and he looks to feed Blaise down low, and then if they sag off, then you can put the ball on the deck and attack. So there's definitely ways that you can figure out a way to get them both involved, and I think Hoiberg is going to have to at least try.
I'm not even thinking like offensively. I'm thinking, how about if you want to double team a Zach Edey, or if you want to double team, one of these Big Ten big guys, or even when they play Creighton next year, if you want to, how do they want to defend Ryan Kalkbrenner? I mean, it's, I think there's all sorts of possibilities with those two guys, but I think you summed it up pretty well.
Well, actually, let's see if this will work. Trying something out here.
Yeah, obviously rebounding was an area we really struggled in this year. And, towards the end of the year, we did play, big at times. And I liked what I saw. I've generally played with 4 guys that can space it at any time, but, he can be creative and run different short pick and roll type packages, get a guy down on the baseline, roll a guy into the pocket, which Derek is phenomenal in that pocket, a very good passer, for his size. So, I think you can get away with running some actions on that end of the floor, and then rebounding and physicality is going to help in a big way, certainly when you have those two guys on the floor together.
So, yeah, that was Fred Hoiberg kind of answering the question about how he does see those view. And those are some of the kind of points that I've mentioned as well. So yeah, we'll see how it works, how much those guys play together. I don't know. And this kind of leads into the second question here. And you look at the roster right now, and he did provide an update on Wilhelm Breidenbach, said he's progressing well. He's gained about 15 pounds. Can't really do much outside of like spot up shooting at this point, but they are expecting to get him back for the summer stuff. Should be good to go in a few months here. But right now, Wilhelm is really the only 4 on the entire roster. So they're a little light there inside. So that could be a place where, yeah, those minutes come from. You have to play 2 bigs because you don't have a backup for Wilhelm right now, unless you want to go back to playing CJ Wilcher at the 4. And then Derek's second question is, let's say Trey comes back and there's 1 transfer spot. What is the profile of that player in your opinion? So if Trey doesn't come back, I think it's all in on Antonio Reeves to fill that 2 spot. You do need kind of a bucket getter to replace what Bryce McGowan's provided. You look at this roster and I see a lot of kind of role pieces that I think fit together a little bit better maybe than last year, but you don't have that stud bucket getter. And Reeves is a guy that averaged a pretty efficient 20 points a game last year at Illinois State. Now, he didn't do much else besides score. He's not a great playmaker for others. He's not a big rebounder. Defensively, I don't know what he provides on that end, but he is a 6'4" guard that can go get you buckets and can shoot the 3. And those are things that Nebraska desperately needs on this team. So Reeves is definitely the priority right now, it seems like, and I think you take him either way. But if Trey doesn't come back, that fit is even more seamless, where he slides into that 2 spot, playing alongside Sam Greasel. And then maybe if with that other spot, you do go out and find a stretch 4 or somebody that can play behind Breidenbach, so you're not relying so much on Wilcher sliding down and having to defend guys 4 or 5 inches taller than him.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I'd say, sorry, holy cow, excuse me, I forgot. I'm usually good to hit my mute button and cover my coughs, but I'd say it's pretty clear they're all in on Reeves. He's not the same size as the person I'm about to mention, but the way he plays and like the way his body is kind of gave me some James Palmer Jr. vibes watching some clips. Yeah. That's kind of what I thought watching him. I'm like this guy reminds me of JPJ. But and then if Trey doesn't come back and talking like stretch 4s, and I'm not only about to say this name because Adam Howard is following him on Twitter, because I watched him a lot of the season at Colorado State, and that's Deshawn Thomas. Desean Thomas, he's 6'9", made I think 4 threes in the NCAA tournament against Michigan in their opening game.
3 or 4 against Creighton when I saw that.
Yeah,
game.
started part of the year at Colorado State, came off the bench part of the year, played the 4, played the 5, and could step out and shoot that thing. So it's kind of, if they're, for lack of a better way to phrase it, if they end up having to shop for a Lat Mayan replacement, I would look no further than Deshawn Thomas, who ironically already wears number 11 at Colorado State. So it would be a seamless slide in if they were to go after him with that open spot. But I think the profile of what they need right now is that bucket getter, scoring wing guard combo kind of. And Antonio Reeves is that to a T. And you can tell that by all the schools that reached out to him right when he put his name in the portal. Yeah.
And so definitely the priority, and they're getting him on campus right away here for the spring game. So that'll be a big opportunity to really sell him of their vision and sell him on what his role will be for this team. Obviously, we saw what Bryce McGowan just did. That's 17 points a game in the lineup that they need to replace somehow. And so you add him to that mix, alongside Greasel. Now suddenly you can kind of bring Ramel Lloyd along at his own pace, and you can play him with both of those guys. You can play him off the ball. You can play him at the point alongside. Heck, you could play all 3 of those guys together. And that really kind of allows, I think, a guy like Lloyd to go out there and kind of adjust to Division I basketball at his own rate and make plays where he gets the opportunity to, but where Nebraska doesn't have to rely on him to be the point guard or to be a primary scorer for this team as a true freshman. Because we saw what Bryce McGowan was able to do this past year, and Lloyd's not quite the caliber of recruit that McGowan's was, but you don't necessarily want to put that responsibility on a guy either. I don't know that leads to. We saw last year that as good as Bryce was, it didn't really lead to wins. So I like how that picture looks if they can land somebody like Reeves and what it means for the overall development of the backcourt and the players on the team.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And one thing about Ramel is, like, all freshmen are still freshmen, and they do have to, make the adjustment to, college ball. But if there's anybody who knows a thing or two about playing games with plenty of people in the stands and plenty of cameras on the baseline, it's somebody who played at Sierra Canyon. And played with Amari Bailey and played with Bronny James. Yeah. I think he knows all about big time settings for playing ball. So who knows? Maybe his adjustment period will not be your typical freshman adjustment period. But then the Big Ten's the Big Ten. So who knows? But he knows a thing or two about high pressure basketball.
Yeah, definitely used to the spotlight. So, well, I think that about covers everything that we had talked about. I think that covers all the news that's happened in the last couple of weeks. We're waiting on decisions from Trey McGowan's lap man final there. We'll see kind of how the recruitment of Reeves and anybody else they may target plays out. But those are the next bits of news that we're kind of waiting on. And so we may, once again, not sure when we will next record. It'll kind of depend on the news cycle and whether or not we have something to talk about. But hopefully these things will move along smoothly and we'll have some good news to react to. And if that is the case, then we will certainly hop back on the mics here and provide you with our breakdown. But in the meantime, this has been the Nebraska Shoot Around podcast. Please go rate, review, like, subscribe, all that stuff. We're not going to have necessarily weekly episodes throughout the off season, but as of now, we are planning to be back next season, and we'll bring you whatever the kind of news cycle produces throughout this off season. So if you're subscribed, that'll pop up in your feed whenever it happens, whenever we do record, and you won't have to worry about kind of paying attention to us. So until next time, this is Jacob Bigelow signing off for Jacob Bigelow and the Nebraska Shoot Around podcast.
A Hurrdat Media Production.